the biennial model is not a static term, Europe is not a static term. And between 1996 and 2010, Europe has not remained stable as a fiction or as a construct. And so this is, there's a possibility of kind of reductivism in talking about manifesta. So for that reason, I'd just like to speak about one aspect here, one of the governing aspects, which was the way that its nomadic dynamic has crystallized and contributed to a certain collective imagination, a certain demos, a European demos, that is a kind of border demos. So what happens when, again, institutional biennial, official culture, integrates into its own mechanisms and its own projection this border state, right, as a kind of offshoot and continuation of the modernist project that we've seen earlier on. So perhaps more than other world events, September 11th and the aftermath, you could say, has eroded national frontiers. At the same time, with the erosion of national frontiers, we've had the growing sentiment of insecurity and threat to national identity and a kind of fortification of borders to control the movement of people, information, and goods. So in a paradoxical condition of increased openness, there's also this defensive retrenchment. And it's worth asking, in this context, how Manifesta's roaming format and its discourse of decentralization, how they play a role in creating new possibilities and limits for European territories and subjectivities, and who do they really represent? So in the catalogue of Manifesta 3, 2000, the issue of borders is framed in this way, quote, "Since its inception, Manifesta has had to take account of the changing parameters of artistic exchange. Our initial emphasis on stimulating an East-West dialogue is gradually being replaced with a broader concern for negotiating the shifting borders between center and periphery, wherever these happen to be located at the time." So editions 1 and 2 were in Rotterdam and Luxembourg, and edition 3 was in Ljubljana. Manifesta asserted the importance of opening a dialogue between Western and Eastern Europe through cultural pathways, but since then, there's been a kind of realignment of the topography and its cartography beyond an East-West axis to also engage with the north and south, as far south as Cyprus, basically. That's as far south as it's gotten. And so by choosing Nicosia in Cyprus, Manifesta acknowledged in some way the importance of the Mediterranean region to the constitution of a pan-European identity, and the importance of absorbing the notion of frontiers into the biennial, beyond strict territorial boundaries. If we can move to the next image. Well, you have 3 maps here. What you have here on the left is a map of Nicosia that's offered by the Greeks. The quality is not really transmitted very well, but you have one image of Nicosia, the capital of Cyprus. On the other hand, you have the Greek map, and here you have the Manifesta map, the kind of branding map for Manifesta, also showing the border, because Nicosia is a divided city. So you have the issue of the border as a kind of branding mechanism, and you have kind of different representations of Nicosia offered by the 2 sides. So what's most interesting for me, this constitution of Europe, is the way that it confounds, in the way, first of all, that Manifesta included Cyprus, let's say, 2 years before Cyprus entered the Eurozone. So here biennial is preceding political shifts that are on the ground. What's interesting is that it's confounding the relation between interiority and exteriority, and that these are actually being negotiated through cultural mechanisms that are, again, official cultural mechanisms. But what's paradoxical about Manifesta is that on the one hand, you have this nomadic framework that maps this European cultural citizenship based on the condition of internalizing the experience of the border. So to all those who can go to these events, there is a kind of manufacture of the experience of the border. So we're living in a relational specificity between multiple coordinates. On the other hand, by grafting a kind of the format of the biennial exhibition, which is the most successful transnational commodity for the diffusion of global culture onto specific locales, you also have obviously the erosion of national border and a kind of image of a European cultural citizenship with a supranational mandate at the level of global flows. And so there's a kind of testing of the nation state and a proposition perhaps even for a different model of cultural citizenship that's offered to a very specific public. On the other hand, there's the possibility of a kind of reactionary aspect to this, or reactionary result, in that specificity is eroded, right? It's all Europe, it's all good, we're all border subjects, but of course, for some the border is a different experience for bare life than for others. So, to address the first claim, the title and conceptual framework of the third edition of Manifesta was called Borderline Syndrome. Energies of Defense. It was curated, and so energies of defense, very important, right? Borderline energies of defense. It was curated by Francesco Bonami from Italy, Ole Boeman from the Netherlands, Maria Hlavajova from Hungary, and Catherine Romberg from Austria. And the term borderline syndrome is one proposed in 1967 by the Viennese psychoanalyst Otto Kernberg to describe a failure to develop properly during childhood, which leads to a weak ego and the diffusion of identity that makes it difficult for the subject to attain a coherent sense of self. Kernberg says that borderline personality is one that proposes a subject which has a split psychological structure, which means that their effect and representation of the self and the other are unintegrated and undifferentiated, with an unending oscillation between fantasy and reality, between the limits of the self and the other. The borderline personality runs a risk of developing psychosis and neurosis. And this was essentially the thesis of a kind of syndrome that one had to defend oneself from. So in positing this term and this condition as the framework to mediate between Western and Eastern Europe, only 9 years after Slovenian independence and 8 years after its recognition by the European Union in 2004, the curators of Manifesta recognized that the processes, anxieties, and dilemmas of identity formation haunt the constitution of Europe at the local, national, and transnational level. It's also interesting that in this context, the curators found it important to add the suggestive title, Energies of Defense. With this addendum, Manifesta 3 alludes to both the real and imagined threats posed to the subject by borderline syndrome and the expenditure of psychic energy needed to live in such a fraught condition. If the experiences of internal disintegration and incompleteness contribute to the constituent anxiety that defines the space of the border, we clearly need to be attentive to the connection between subjective fragmentation and the spatial dimension. In other words, we want to link the space of subjectivization with the order of site-specific exhibitions and the negotiation of space on a cultural level. Here it might be useful, of course, to evoke Mi Wan Kwan, Homi Bhabha, locational identity, relational specificity, and so here the singular experience of the border, according to these theorists, is one that is based on a relational specificity. We all know this. So with this in mind, what does it mean for Manifesta to graft and make visible the relational specificity of a border citizenship as an official cultural mechanism along various geographical, cultural, and socio-political axes? What does it mean to seriously consider Manifesta's pan-European format as a proposition of identifying every place, every space, every subject in Europe as a physical, symbolic, and psychic border? So these multiple and proliferating borders do not simply delineate the political limits of sovereign territories, but actually crisscross every suburb, every town, every country to transform the contemporary political European body into a border demos. That is in fact what Manifesta is suggesting by its itinerant structure and by its emphasis on a kind of border identity. So always in a state of liminality between interior and exterior, collectivities in which sites and subjects are always fundamentally split and multiple, to create a different kind of interplay between we and the they, between nation state and national imaginary. So the border demos in this official projection is woven from the frictions between inclusion and exclusion, as they're elaborated through notions of territorial, socio-political, linguistic, religion, cultural affiliations, and antagonisms. So while the nation-state plays a formative role in European social construction, even today, obviously, Manifesta attempts to be more meta-post than a kind of global theory, in that it's based on these kinds of micro-identities that don't cohere into singular wholes, but are constantly creating new border identities. And one could say that this is pretty radical, on the one hand, that this is happening. Because it invites us to consider a number of important questions. First, what are the practices of territorialization that define a people? And how can cultural practices, in particular, participate in different interpolation of subjects? More specifically, can we question the supposition that identity is mandated by a primary affiliation to a nation state? And this is what Manifesta is kind of asking us. And that both the we and the they are known quantities that operate in an already established or a mobile relation to power. So Manifesta is actually suggesting in many ways that the notion of border identity is one in which external and internal frontiers have to be constantly reimagined as a projection and also a protection. A projection, let's say, progressively, and as a protection in a reactionary way for the collective and for the subject. So because Manifesta's projected demos is based on this internal flux and fragmentation, it can't really sustain an autonomous natural community for a coherent nation state. I mean, that's the kind of logical, perhaps, conclusion. And my argument, on the one hand, is that by its roving kind of elaboration of new borders, the exhibition does produce a new image of the people. On the other hand, one has to ask, of course, who are these people, right? Who can imagine themselves, who have the privilege of imagining themselves as a border subject while living in Frankfurt, right? Or while living in Genk. More importantly, it creates the condition of possibility for the people to continually produce themselves through their own border identity. So, I want to now, against this claim that I just made, which is a kind of progressive, one might say utopian claim, ask what happens when this kind of conflict, which has been internalized in the project of the nation state as a kind of modernist project, now literally clashes with this model of the biennial that positions itself as this progressive border state. And one can see this in the Nicosia, in Manifesta Nicosia in Cyprus. So even though, again, so that's what I'm kind of asking now. And the Nicosia Manifesta was cancelled only 3 months before the opening, so it never happened. After disagreements between the 3 curators and the city-run non-profit organization that was sponsored the event, called Nicosia for Art, after they had basically had personal and professional and political clashes. So the 3 curators who who had, in 2006, who had offered themselves as a team were Mai Abu El Dahab from Egypt, Anton Vidokle from Russia, who is New York based and is part of Efflux, and Florian Waldvogel, who's a curator and critic and editor in Germany. So they intended to come to Nicosia and to start an experimental art school that would operate in the northern Turkish Cypriot sector and the southern Greek Cypriot sector of the divided island. This was supposed to be a bi-communal school that was to be made up of international students and teachers who had responded to an open call. So open to everyone who could get Efflux, and basically anybody who could come for the time and pay their own way to be there. And during the 3 months of the exhibition, they were supposed to cooperate and produce new works, events, and a new model for contemporary art education. So both the curators and the Greek Cypriot sponsors have different versions of events, which is of course the case. But the exhibition was cancelled when plans for the experimental school seemed to extend beyond the limits of Manifesta. Manifesta was supposed to be a temporary art school and temporary exhibition site, and what seemed to happen in one version of events is that it would become a formal entity and a permanent infrastructure in this divided city. So from the way they describe it, the curators were working under the assumption that the Greek Cypriot government was supporting their project of operating on both sides of the divided city, including the occupied part of Nicosia. After the cancellation, Vidocle accused the Greek Cypriot organizers of systematically undermining the exhibition through a lack of budgetary transparency, cooperation in securing venues, and issuing visas for participants and curators who needed them in order to work in Cyprus. Apart from this administrative obstruction, he also charged that Nicosia for Art, despite the public statements of support that had been made, ultimately refused to facilitate or allow any activities of Manifesta in the Turkish Cypriot community, and claimed that it was somehow illegal. No specific law has ever been quoted to us that would substantiate this new position, he says, and we completely disagree with this. So the director of Nicosia for Art, Yanis Toumatis, explained things a little differently. He said, "No one is denying that the Greek Cypriot organizers had agreed that Manifesta 6 would be bicommunal. We proved this by organizing events in the occupied part of Nicosia and by planning to organize more. But that is something totally different than founding a school department in an occupied territory. A bicommunal project is one thing, but the building of infrastructures in an illegal state is quite another. We never agreed to this. We could never agree to this. We would not cancel out our own existence." That was a quote. There are a number of ways to gauge the implications of this cancellation. One might easily draw the conclusion that the sphere of representation cannot compete with the tangibility of political imperatives. If this is the case, then artistic and cultural practices appear as nothing more than symbolic and inoperative accessories to the serious business of politics, and we may as well write them off as failures. More interesting, I think, is the possible conclusion that Manifesta 6 was a successful, if unintended, demonstration of the way that a cultural construction of border identity, as an official mandate from Rotterdam, can reveal the complexities of nation-state formation. If we use the terminology of Arjun Appadurai, the sociologist and anthropologist Arjun Appadurai, Manifesta effectively brought to the fore the Greek Cypriot anxiety of incompleteness. According to Appadurai, the presence of minorities is a painful reminder to the majority of the small gap or deficit that prevents them from attaining the wholeness of an untainted national ethnos, which is, of course, what we've seen historically throughout the 20th century. This anxiety has the potential to turn into a predatory violence or even genocide, as the majoritarian identity seeks to consolidate its power and purity. With Cyprus politically divided between Greek and Turkish Cypriots, the situation in Nicosia was far from reaching such extremes. Nevertheless, as Toumasis' comment reveal, the official spokesperson for Nicosia for Art, the matter of national purity was deeply embedded in the sponsor's cancellation of the event. While it may be difficult to understand how establishing an art school across both sides of the border would have cancelled out the existence of the Greek Cypriots, this is precisely the majority's irrational anxiety of incompleteness that a border identity might produce. In contrast to this insistence on borders, we also need to address my second claim, the one that considers Manifesta's appartenance to the mega exhibition structure of the biennial and the cultural dimensions of globalization. At its apogee, this counter-model was linked to a confidence in the benefits of open markets, free flows of capital, cultures without interferences of borders. But since the speed scale of global transactions, interactions, and communications moved at unqualified rhythms, we would be justified in asking whether a mega exhibition like Manifesta situates the European citizen as having a mega identity that somehow floats above the impediments of borders and the local protocols of national sovereignty. Does the migration and circulation of the biennial exhibition structure go hand in hand with a mobile global subject? This is perhaps a rhetorical question. If so, how does this implicate Manifesta and its negotiation of European borders? To develop this connection, we need to approach globalization, of course, as the contradictory process that it is. A process that cannot be reduced to either deterritorialization and elimination of difference in a post-national world, or a renewed ethnic and national provincialism and increased segregation. At one level, Manifesta's identity as a biennial, as an official biennial, does indeed align it with the shared concerns of other such large-scale exhibitions. Here there's a universal appeal that they're trying to create to global subjects, right, who share the possibility of movement across borders. They have the economic means to travel across the globe in order to compare and contrast Manifesta with other biennials and to grasp its specificity. In this respect, we might argue that the globalization of the biennial exhibition format functions positively because it allows Manifesta to hone its difference. It's not Venice, not Havana, not Sharjah, not Shanghai. With the so-called horizontalization of culture, the distinctness of a roving biennial emerges as part of a process, but also unique to it. But of course, this is on the level of extreme kind of neoliberal privilege. In a counter-dynamic, we could say that within a particular framework of Manifesta, there are specific ideas that were not foreseen, that were not scripted, that were not curated, that were able to migrate out of the biennial structure and contribute to other partnerships, networks, and models. And this is perhaps what we spoke about yesterday about the outcome and the afterlives of certain curatorial strategies that give rise to new performative possibilities. For example, the experimental art school that never came to be in Nicosia became a kind of roving art school. If I didn't have the next image. A roving art school called United Nations Plaza in Berlin, a productive failure that was transformed into a temporary school that brought together approximately 30 artists, writers, and theorists for a period of 1 year between 2006 and 2007. Of course, you may critique this and say, who are these people who were able to come here for a year and pontificate? It also spawned a series of lectures, seminars, and workshops known as Night School, which took place in New York City in 2008 and 2009, and that went on to become part of the DF in Mexico City in 2008. So we have here an open framework somehow, or something that opened up from the biennial structure, a kind of suppleness of a curatorial vision, if you will, or an ability to turn around a productive failure that could migrate as an educational proposition. And the fact that it emerged from a cultural negotiation of the question of Europe and found homes in Berlin, in New York, in Mexico City, does suggest that the condition of border identity, at least for some, those who are privileged, is a global one. So while so I'm trying to conclude now, I think it's time. So while all of these exhibitions, Documenta, Biennale de Paris, were not without their contradictions, they were nevertheless founded as a way to support the reconstruction of the nation state through a fortification of a kind of sovereign status as a prerequisite for becoming part of a new Europe. And in that sense, modernism was part of this sovereign status, something that was a kind of connecting transnational model of the subject that could somehow escape historical otherness, historical objection, right? It was a kind of elevation of the subject and a repression or a subjection of a certain European history in order to kind of mandate a new nation state that could operate at the supranational level. Manifesta's specificity, one could say, that it recognizes the problematic of borders as one of the most pressing issues in the contemporary imagination of Europe. And though it embraces the exhibition format of the biennial, It complicates slightly this model by moving away from previous paradigms framed of biennial in relationship to one nation state. So opening up, hopefully, a more interesting iteration of the local-global dialectic. So mobilizing here, Manifesta mobilizing cultural mechanisms as a way to bring visibility to different representations of border identity at different spaces in the topography of Europe as it is and Europe as it is to come, the yet to come. So encouraging, hopefully, a kind of articulation of new spatial and subjective experiences. And the central artery of this European demos, as Manifesta posits it, is one that is constantly negotiating border identity that becomes the new universal signifier. So the new universal signifier here is an inherent incompleteness, both for the minority and for the majority. And here, this is kind of crucial, this is what I'm getting to, is that this inherent incompleteness of the universal signifier of the border demos can be both a space for reinvention and it can be the ultimate space for reactionism. So despite the stark differences between these three exhibitions, and this is what we've seen with the Nicosia example, the way that you have both possibilities. So despite the stark differences, what they make visible, at least, is that cultural mediation has played an important part in European identity, that it has been an overlooked pathway, at least in the kind of heroic narrative of post-war European art, and that it can construct a public sphere in ways that are distinct somehow or singular as a political proposition, while addressing similar problems. And in these multiple ways, Europe and its publics are still an unresolved cultural problem. If we can claim that there's a move from a nation state to a border state, this is not a concretized or an accomplished political reality, but one that is hinged at all times still between nation and post-nation, between a kind of reinvention and reactionism. Voilà.
Hi, Ren, I'm Popem. I'll do the summary in Armenian before we move to questions.
And I also brought some other images of the way that actually some of the artists who have been in also some of these later exhibitions who have taken the project of representing other bodies in public spaces in different ways. So I've kind of provided a bit of a coda in case we wanted to look at more images in which you have kind of different bodies circulating. And these are artists who were part of these exhibitions. So that's also available.
Կաշխատեմ կարճ ամփոփել պատմականորեն շատ խիտ այս ելույթը։ Ուրեմն Նուի Պանայի հիմնական հարցադրումը հետևյալն է, ինչպես են տեսողական արվեստի պրակտիկաները մասնակցում Եվրոպայի կառուցմանը որպես երևակայական կոնստրուկտ։ Ինչպես է արվեստը, որ միշտ ապաքաղաքական է համարվել, ավանդականորեն եւ համարվում, երբեմն իրականում մասնակցել Եվրոպան երևակայելու նախագծին, եւ դիտարկում է այս խնդիրը մոդեռնիզմի կոնստրուկտի հետ հարաբերության մեջ, որպես համընդհանուրության ու եզակիության կամ համընդհանուրության եւ մասնակիության հարաբերություն ազգային պետության սահմաններում։ Որպես հարցը քննարկում է 3 դեպքի ուսումնասիրությամբ, տարբեր ժամանակաշրջաններում առաջի 2 դեպքերը 1955 թվականի առաջին դոկումենտան է Գերմանիայի Քասել քաղաքում եւ 59 թվականի Փարիզի բիենալեն եւ երկուսն էլ տեղի են ունեցել իհարկե հետ պատերազմյան Եվրոպայի վերակառուցման կոնտեքստում եւ հենց հետ պատերազմյան Եվրոպայի գաղափարական այդպես եւ քաղաքական նախագծի շրջանակներում Բանախոսը հարցադրում է Էտիեն Բալիբարի, փիլիսոփա Էտիեն Բալիբարի այն թեզը, թե Եվրոպան մեր գոյություն ունեցող եւ անավարտ քաղաքական ծրագրի ֆիգուրն է։ Ու հարցադրում է, թե ովքեր են մենքը կամ թե ինչպես է կառուցվում եվրոպական հանրային ոլորտը որպես բացառման եւ ներառման ոլորտ տեսողական եւ էսթետիկ պրակտիկաների մասնակցությամբ։ Ուրեմն եւ երրորդ դեպքը մանիֆեստան է Եվրոպական բիենալեն, որը հիմնադրվել է 96 թվականին, սակայն նախ կարճ վերադառնանք դոկումենտային եւ Փարիզի բիենալեին։ Ինչպես նշեցինք, երկուսն էլ ձևավորվել են հետպատերազմյան Եվրոպայի կոնտեքստում, երբ պետք է վերահաստատել խաղաղություն, եվրոպական վերաինտեգրում, ազգային պետության վերակառուցում, բայց վերազգային դիսկուրսի, եվրոպական դիսկուրսի սահմաններում որպես ռեակցիա կամ հակազդեցություն ազգային կամ ռասայական պետության ավելի շուտ նացիստական նախագծի։ Փաստորեն դոկումենտա եւ Փարիզի բիենալեն այստեղ առաջ են գալիս որպես նոր մշակութային դիվանագիտության վերաներկայացումներ նոր կառուցվող Եվրոպայի համատեքստում։ Եվ այստեղ հարցն այն է, թե ինչպես է կուրատորությունն առնչվում այս պաշտոնական վերաներկայացմանը հենց ցուցադրման մոդելների մակարդակում։ Արդյոք պաշտոնական այս մոդելից շեղումներ կամ այլընտրանքներ կան։ Սակայն հիմնական նյութը հենց գաղափարականի ու արվեստայինի հարաբերությունների ուսումնասիրությունն է։ Ուրեմն առաջին դոկումենտան փաստորեն 55 թվականին ներկայացնում էր փորձեր վերակազմավորել այդպես ավանգարդի եվրոպական խզված պատմությունը, որը իհարկե խզվել էր Երկրորդ համաշխարհային պատերազմի տարիներին եւ իհարկե 37 թվականի այլասերված դեգեներատված արվեստ ցուցահանդեսի միջոցով, որը տեղի ունեցավ Մյունխենում, ինչպես հիշում ենք, եւ փաստորեն խնդիրը վերակենդանացնելն էր մոդեռնիզմը, բայց արդեն բարձր մոդեռնիզմի ամերիկյան դիսկուրսի սահմաններում, երբ մոդեռնիզմը Եվրոպա է վերադառնում абստրակցիոնիզմի միջոցով, այսինքն դոկումենտայում չեք տեսնի դադայիզմ, չեք տեսնի ռուսական կոնստրուկտիվիզմ, Ջոն Հարտֆիլդ, Նոել Սիտլիշկայտ եւ Կոպրա եւ այլն, այսինքն եվրոպական ավանգարդիան ռադիկալ մոդելները, որոնք փաստորեն նաեւ ջնջվել են հետպատերազմյան տարիներին։ Փաստորեն այստեղ փորձեր վերականգնել մոդեռնիստական հետազգի դիսկուրսի գաղափարաբանությունը եւ ընդհանրապես հետազգային ազգայնականությունը վերազգային եվրոպական նախագծի պայմաններում։ Նման նպատակ էր ծառայում նաեւ Փարիզի բիենալեն 59 թվականին մշակույթի նախարար Անդրե Մալրոյի հիմնադրած ծրագիրը, որը նաև փորձ էր վերականգնել պատերազմի տարիներին վնասված այդպես Փարիզի կարգավիճակը որպես արվեստային մայրաքաղաք։ Եվ իհարկե խնդիրը երիտասարդական մշակույթի խրախուսումն էր, եւ սա կատարվում էր ինֆորմելի խրախուսմամբ, ինֆորմելի տարածմամբ, որը այդպես կարող են դրա ամերիկյան համարժեքը համարել абստրակտ էքսպրեսիոնիզմը։ Եվ այս Փարիզի բիենալեն Շարլ դե Գոլի հետպատերազմյան հռետորության կոնտեքստում է ձևավորում եւ հիմնական խնդիրը թե Ֆրանսիայում թե Գերմանիայում ինչպես մուտք գործել վերազգայինի մեջ ազգային պետության սահմաններում։ Եվ գալիս ենք 1996 թվական մանիֆեստա 40 տարի անց, որը կարծես նախանշում է ազգային պետությունից դեպի սահմանային պետություն մի անցում։ Մանիֆեստան հիմնադրվել է 96-ին, ինչպես ասացին, Ռոտերդամում եւ տեղավորվում այդպես նոր Եվրոպայի ընդարձակ դիսկուրսի մեջ մասնակցություն, արվեստային մասնակցություն ունենալու գաղափարաբանության մեջ։ Եվ ինչպես Փարիզի բիենալեն, այստեղ էլ շեշտը դրվում է երիտասարդ արվեստագետների վրա, ու խնդիրը շրջանցելն էր Վենետիկի բյուրոկրատացված բիենալեն, որը ազգային պետության սահմաններում է դեռևս գործում։ Ուրեմն մանիֆեստան այդպես քոչվոր բիենալե է, ամեն տարի 2 տարին մեկ մի վայրում է, եվրոպական վայրում է տեղի ունենում, եւ այս ընտրված վայրերը պետք է կարծես կենտրոնական չլինեն, լուսանցքային լինեն, եւ մանիֆեստայի պատմության մեջ այլևս այդպես չեմ խորանա, նույնի բանայը փաստարկում է, որ քոչվորական այս դինամիկան մանիֆեստայի բյուրեղացնում է եվրոպական նոր ինքնությունը, որը սահմանային դեմոսի ինքնություն է անվանում, եւ նրա հարցն այն է, թե ինչպես է մանիֆեստայի տեղաշարժվող ֆորմատը տեղայնացնում նոր Եվրոպան, տարածականացնում նոր Եվրոպան, այդ վատ իմաստով, բացասական իմաստով։ Եվ նաև չեմ խորանա այդ 2006 թվականի Նիկոզիայի մանիֆեստայի մանրամասների մեջ կարող եք կարդալ շատ այդպես արծարծվել, որի համադրողներն էին Մայա Բուելդահաբը, Անտոն Վիդոկլը եւ գերմանացի Ֆլորիան Վալդֆոգելը, պես սկանդալային բիենալե էր Նիկոզիայում, որ այդպես էլ տեղի չունեցավ, սակայն այս բիենալեն հարցեր է բարձրացնում, թե օրինակ որոնք են տեղայնացման մեխանիզմներ, մշակութային արտադրությունն ինչպիսի ինքնություններ է կոչում, այսպիսի տարածականացնող մեխանիզմներով։ Եվ սահմանային ինքնությունը փաստորեն մի ինքնություն է, որը այդպես կարող ենք անվանել դիալեկտիկական, այն եւ հզորացման եւ նոր սուբյեկտիվությունների հնարավորություն է տալիս, բայց նաեւ պաշտպանող ու փակող է։ Եվ խնդիրը թե ինչպես է քոչվորական այս բիենալեն տեղավորվում ընդհանրապես գլոբալ սուբյեկտիվության դիսկուրսի մեջ։ Իսկ գլոբալիզացիան ինքնին գիտենք, որ հակասական գործընթաց է, որը չենք կարող հանգեցնել ոչ ինքնության, իսկության վերականգնմանը եւ ոչ էլ ինքնությունների ստանդարտացմանը բևեռացնող դիսկուրսներին։ Հիմա խնդիրն այն է, թե ինչպես այս սահմանային դեմոսը, որը որպես համընդհանուր նշանակիչ, համընդհանուրի նշանակիչ անավարտ է, եւ թե ինչպես այս ռեակցիոնիստական պաշտպանվող ինքնությունների։ Սա է նոր եւ, այսինքն նոր Եվրոպայի հանրությունների խնդիրը, նոր Եվրոպայի սուբյեկտիվությունների խնդիրը դեռևս բաց է մնում։
That's great, thank you. Well done. Can I also have the next image, just as something to look at that's a little bit different? How? Yeah, next one. Yeah. Just something a little different. Yes, Angela.
Okay, I have actually several questions, but I will try to be minimal. I was wondering, I mean, you're looking at the ideological institutional, institutional structures that participate or reproduce certain political dynamics, or like participate in the ideological interpolation of new subjectivities that is already sanctioned politically. So I'm wondering, like, at the level of artworks and curatorial strategies, apart from the Nicosia example, are there any frictions within the events themselves, like for example the Manifesta? Are there artworks that challenge those notions of territorialization, but also like becoming tools for cultural diplomacy, or like reproduction of the very same ideologies that the institutions themselves participate? That's one question, and the second one is, what's the dynamic in relation to the construction of the new Europe, or like the imaginary construction of the new Europe, in terms of that between Manifestas, this new model of a nomadic biennial that, as you claim or as you theorized, constructs a sort of border identity, border demos, what you called, and Documenta that still exists and is still, let's say, like inherited from the supranational national model of Europe. I think like both are very large questions. Maybe you can choose which one you want to address.
Those are actually two super good questions, because you could say that a limit of what I've just offered is a lack of engagement with the specific works that are able to perhaps animate or create frictions within this official institutional structure. I have to admit that I haven't looked at all the works and all the exhibitions. I mean, I haven't seen them all, live. I've seen many of them in catalogs. So there's that limit. But I brought actually certain artists who were part of the Manifesta in order to perhaps see that. So you have, for example, here also I'm showing you in a way official artists, in the way that these artists have become kind of representative of this discourse at the highest level of the art world. So Calderatilla, for example, whose Gardaya from 2009 above is made of couscous. It's the Algerian city, town, village that is now cast out of couscous, and above it you see photos of Le Corbusier, and also a map, which you can't see there, of Le Corbusier's Ville Radieuse, which came after he visited Gardaya, came after he visited Algeria. So here modernism, the modernist template, the modernist model, actually emerges from an encounter with an Algerian form. And this was in one of the, this is actually from Liverpool, but this is a work that Khalil showed in one of the manifestos. So you could say here that there's an artist who is reclaiming or kind of talking about the flow of the appropriation of signs and kind of rechanneling the flow of the appropriation of signs, so that modernism is, again, a kind of more complicated geopolitical, geographical. You could say that that disrupts, perhaps, that model. If we could go to another work. The next one, please, Hubble. This is the work of Mounir Fatmi, who is a Moroccan artist, who, what he did is he put a tag of his name on his body, and then took a photo of his body, and it became a billboard that circulated on buses throughout Frankfurt. So here you have, I mean, in the context of 2004, 3 years after the World Trade Center, a kind of ethnic body, an other body that's circulating in Frankfurt as a kind of public advertisement to look at otherness, that is also coming from a kind of different agency, you might say, subjective agency. If we can go to the next image. This is questionable, but I put it here just because I think it's kind of interesting to show things that are not, you know. This is Beat Strulli's work. He's a Swiss artist, and this is a work that he does in different cities in Europe. He was part of the Manifesta, but these are other works, in which he comes to the city, goes to kind of a main square or main thoroughfare or main public space, and photographs the community, and then brings it into the gallery space. So you might see something like Brussels, which appears more diverse, as opposed to a kind of Polish constituency, which appears, again, this is on the level of appearance, of representation, and here you might ask whether this is truly a kind of disruptive act, or if it's, you know, just more of the same. I'm actually not convinced. I think this is a bit of a kind of, obviously, a fetishization of communities. So how do you know, but this appears with, this was part of also a kind of manifesta manufacture. So yes, I think there are certain works, and let's see one more work. Okay, well, this was not in Manifesta, but again, I'm showing you the kind of dominant works, right? The works that have become iconic for somehow representing otherness. Santiago Sierra was in Venice, so not in Manifesta, and this is a procedure in which illegal or undocumented workers had their hair dyed and were thus made visible, the kind of those who are usually invisible. This is, of course, a kind of critical exploitation, but and so you might ask whether any of these works, once they're in the format of the biennial, have any kind of ability to disrupt anything. I'm not sure. I'm not sure that they do once they're canonicized, once they're historicized, once they've become embedded in the biennial. I think they have a very short shelf life, actually, and it might just be in a kind of flight, a moment of flight, a moment of momentary. But I don't think in the long run they do overcome the biennial model. I'm sorry if that's cynical, but I don't. Should I answer your second question, or should I take another question? Take another question. Yes.
There was this domination of Antonio, as you said, but I think it's also important to mention that in 1971, the young section of the Paris Biennial was the first exhibition where Mail art was introduced. Mail art?
Mail.
And actually that was a very good tool for Eastern European artists to get into Central European or like Central context and to be able to exhibit. And in 71, we had the artists were exhibiting and I think also several more after that. And it was in the 70s, and after that, the Eastern European artists were somehow integrated in this period. It was kind of collateral events as conference were invited, those who were able to play, for example, in those countries. And all these things happened like 10 years before the similar movement started in Germany. They also ended opening to, first of all, to East Germany and then to Eastern Europe. And of course, in the 70s, this was also like a look on the others. And it just only happened 10 or 12 years after the first Paris Biennial that it was tried. And I would just like to ask, what do you think, what was the motivation or why this happened also in the 70s, or what were these happenings in the 70s, which importance did they have in this?
Well, I intentionally set my parameters to 59 because of the moment of Fifth Republic, which is what I'm kind of looking at specifically as the problem of that nation state. But I think you're absolutely right that the Paris Biennial shifts completely, or shifts in certain ways in the 60s and 70s, and is more kind of interested in representing Eastern Europe. And that's probably as a result of 68 in Paris, at least for the Parisian logic, in terms of kind of revolutionary, somehow tapping into the events of 56, the events in 68, and bringing it into a kind of owning it, appropriating it as a kind of radicality in Paris. But what's interesting is that many French artists who were kind of radical obviously would not show in the Paris Biennial. They had like their own Salon de la Jeune Peinture, which was very, very critical of the Biennial, starting in 1964. And moving on through the 60s and 70s. They had collaborations with Cuba that actually happened in Cuba rather than in Paris. So there's an entire kind of avant-garde, Parisian avant-garde that refuses this, but it's paradoxical that it becomes a kind of space of opportunity for Eastern artists, Eastern European artists, precisely because of the kind of ideological appropriation of that radicality within the structure, at least on an official basis. So that's my analysis. Yes, Marina.
First, again, thank you very much. Now, I have to be very short. I have a lot of comments on what you said. First, it was very coherent, and I thought very briefly to say that it's super possibility for us to see the way how art history, because you are coming for a very specific field, and how the practice evolved. Some years ago, it will be no case that modernism will be in relation to nation state. So this is really a big step, because art history practically it's a colonial practice who is not capable it's only narrate. And this narration is still present in your work, but it was not capable, besides narration and description, to